Welcome to Novelist Spotlight, the podcast where published fiction writers are interviewed to gather their insights and writing lessons so we can use them to make ourselves better and more effective writers. There are just 3 things I ask of you, if appropriate to you and your experience. Please subscribe, please click on the like button, and please share this program link with any family members, friends, or colleagues who might be interested or benefit from the content. Now, on with our program.
One of the things that my agent always tells me, and it's always in the back of my head, is to raise the stakes. If the stakes are high enough for your character, then nothing really gets boring.
That is the voice of Joy Callaway, a historical novelist who's in the spotlight during this episode. She is the author of The Fifth Avenue Artist Society, Secret Sisters, and The Grand Design. Here's my conversation with her. She resides in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was my home for 5 years. And Joy, the reason that you came to my attention or that I learned about you is that during a recent visit I made to Charlotte, because my brother still lives there, we visited Barnes & Noble in the Arboretum. I visited, and there was a Barnes & Noble staffer there who was very effusive in her praise of your work. And I believe you had just done a book signing a few days before at the store. Does that ring a bell? Did you do a book signing there at the Barnes & Noble at the Opera? You did. You recall that? Okay.
Yes, I do. I love it there. It's one of those stores that they have a great coffee shop. They have obviously the Arboretum's a hot spot. You can get about anything there. So we live pretty close to the Arboretum as well, and we're there a lot. And so it's always so nice when a book comes out. They're always so supportive. And this time they said, come in and do a signing. And I was shocked and so excited when I showed up and they had so many copies of all of my books there. And Margie, who's there, you probably spoke to her.
It may have been her.
Just been so kind.
Sounds familiar.
Yes, it could have been. She's a great bookseller, and she always has great recommendations too, which I like as a reader. So
yeah, and she had mentioned you and one other person, but she was very effusive in her praise for the work that you do. Do you like public events? I mean, I think you're just finishing up. I believe you're in the middle of a book tour. You're finishing up a book tour for your latest novel. Is that right?
That's right. I do. I love doing events. I love book clubs. That's one of the most fun things I get to do really as a writer, besides writing the actual book, which I obviously is my number one. But I get to go around and I get to meet readers and people that are like-minded and love story. And that's just so much fun for me. So I had a big tour in May when the book came out. And then, ever since I've been doing kind of weekend things. So I'll kind of pop around on the week, I'll do like a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday event. Last week I was in Huntington, West Virginia. Go Herd. That's where I went to school and at Marshall. So got to go do an event there, and then went over to Wardensville, West Virginia, which is a really cute town that I'd never been to, about 45 minutes from DC. And then went down to Richmond and did a book club there, and then popped back home to Charlotte. So it was a long and crazy weekend, but a lot of fun too.
So I noticed your website for our listeners, Joy's website, which is joycallaway.com. You can see the URL in the episode notes. She has her tour dates on there. So if you want to see if she's coming to your area and show up for that, you can go ahead and do that. So when you're at those events, what is it that you want to say to the people, your readers who visit you? Let's say bookstores, not the book club yet. Let's talk about the bookstores. What do you have to say to the people who show up to get a copy of one of your books signed?
Well, first and foremost, I know that without readers and without bookstore owners, I couldn't do what I do. And, this has been a dream of mine for such a long time. Just like a lot of authors, we've been writers and readers since before we can really remember. And it's been a dream of mine to have my book in a bookstore forever. And so, but without bookstore owners, without passionate booksellers, without readers, it's impossible for us to do what we do. We just couldn't do it. And so that's number one for me, is to thank people for reading, and for it makes me so happy to know that my stories that, at one time were just kind of mine are now being shared. And that's kind of our goal as authors, to have others fall in love with our stories as well, and kind of share that love. But secondarily, it's all about talking about the book and sharing the inspiration for it. With this particular book, West Virginia has been my second home my whole life, and I really wanted people that weren't familiar with the state to really just fall in love with it. So I think that, and to fall in love with pioneering women like Dorothy Draper, and to realize too that your dreams, my dream has been realized and is being realized, and that other people, and to kind of encourage that whatever your dream is, to hold on to it, because really this business is a business of persistence, just like a lot of other aspirations are. And just to encourage people, whether they're readers who have other gifts or aspiring writers, just to not give up, that in persistence you usually can eventually win out and realize those dreams you have.
So let's go back in time to that fateful day when you sent some intro pages of your manuscript to an agent, and with the fateful day being when you got an affirmative response from an agent. Do you remember? Tell us about that day. Tell us about how it came down.
Well, every author has a different experience with that. Of course, you have authors who immediately get agents and book deals, and they're very lucky. For me, I wrote what I would call 3 practice novels before I wrote my debut novel. I think I was really trying to find my footing. I look back at those, and I was all over the place with genre, like looking at, everything from historical to contemporary to romance to, speculative fiction. I was all over the board. And when I finally wrote my first historical novel, that's kind of when everything started to click. And I do remember my first agent. I found her actually on Twitter, which is weird. I'm not even on Twitter anymore, but for a long time, it was a pretty big hotbed for literature, like just the literature industry and literary having meaningful connections with literary, agents, or even with other authors. And my former agent, had tweeted, well, I'm looking for, it was very vague actually, I'm looking for a book about love. It can be about family love. It can be about friendship. It can be about romance, and I thought to myself, well, this book has all of that, so I'll try it out. And I really respected her, and she'd been on my list for a long time. And so I sent her the manuscript, or the query letter, with the pages she requested, and she immediately got back to me and said, can I have the full manuscript? And in my time querying, that was exciting when someone offered to look at your full manuscript, but I knew over time that doesn't mean anything really. I mean, there was obviously a pretty big chance she'd come back and say, well, thank you for the pages, but that just wasn't for me. So when she came back and said that she just loved it and absolutely needed to represent the book, it was just a dream come true. And, my daughter at the time was 6 months old, so I had a baby, and which was another obviously big dream of mine. And then I was going to get a book deal, and my agent immediately sent it out to editors. And within a couple of weeks, we had a deal with HarperCollins. So it was a pretty crazy ride.
Wow.
But leading up to that point, it was also a lot of waiting. I'll say that, years of waiting to kind of try to find my way into publishing.
Now, is the agent you're speaking of, is she your agent today?
She's not. My former agent was with me for 2 books and really half of this one. And I still really love and respect her. We have a great relationship. But she went a different way as far as her interests. She doesn't represent really historical fiction anymore. And I needed to find someone who was passionate about the genre. And so now I have a fabulous agent, Kate Mckean, at Moorheim Literary. And I hope to be with her the rest of my career.
It's a long and winding road, and I know what you mean about they asked for the manuscript, and that's cause for excitement, but also you learn pretty quickly that it doesn't mean that an impending deal is going to happen, but at least they were drawn in by those
Right.
early pages, and a person can feel that they're somewhat on the right track. You figured out that you were on the right track when you started writing historical fiction, you're saying. You were bouncing around with different styles of fiction, different genres. What is it about historical that just clicked with you? And are you the fact that you write historical fiction? Did you have a lot of, um, were you a history buff to begin with, or did you research the history as you went and just found that it was something of interest and
Right.
something that came naturally to you?
That's really interesting question, because I don't really even know when my love for history really started. It was never a formal thing for me, and I didn't get degrees in it or anything. But looking back, my parents read us the classics growing up as kids. So before bedtime, they would read us things like The Secret Garden and Black Beauty, The Black Stallion, A Little Princess. Really great works of literature that I would kind of consider today historical fiction, because they all take place obviously in the past. But they were just great works of literature. And I found myself just completely absorbed in those pages and thinking about how really um, it read like a fantasy in some ways, because that type of world I'd never known and is never going to exist again. And so I found myself as a kid just being drawn to things like when Titanic came out. I was really interested in that, and I wanted to learn everything I could about that. And over time, I just knew that I was really interested in the past, and part of that also is because my family is very into ancestry, and we often, even as a little kid, we would talk about my ancestors as though they were, sitting right next to us. They were common topics of conversation, and so I think that also helped my interest in the past, is because we kept people's legacies alive by talking about them. And that was really important to me. And so as I started writing, I just noticed in all of my works, all of my kind of practice novels, they always had some element of history in them. It was as if I really, I was trying to do something trendy maybe. But really what I loved shone through. And so when I finally just decided, I looked at those kind of practice manuscripts and thought to myself, wow, okay, you know, I'm sitting here telling myself something. I'm looking at all these and thinking, well, history's in all of them. So maybe I need to be true to myself and what I love. And so my debut novel was actually about my family history. It's about my great great grandmother, who lived in the Gilded Age Bronx, and her artistic siblings. And it was a true book for me. It was about people I knew to be true. Now the rest of the world didn't have any idea they were real, but um, it made them come off the page so much more fully fledged
Yeah,
than,
yeah.
my other works had.
Because you had been learning about them your whole life from the storytelling from your parents and other relatives, so you felt a tremendous closeness to them, obviously, and you had such a handle on the characters, I would imagine.
Yes.
Is that how it felt, that you just really understood who you were writing about to the degree that it made the writing that much more um, flow that much more readily and come across that much more powerfully?
Yeah, I mean, I knew their stories, and they're my family, and so I think there was a pressure there to get them right. But there was also that familiarity there where I took ownership of the story because they're related to me. It's a personal story to me, and I think that was really special. Just because it was a story that I really could tell, and that made it really great. And I think it did make the characters just come alive all that much more. To
Where are your people from? I mean, what countries did they emigrate from?
all over the place. We have, well, that family, they were descended from the Dutch settlers of New York. So they were Dutch, but on the other side, we had, Irish, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Germany. Let's
Wow.
see, we have some Native American. So just really, I mean, all over the place. And I love that because there's so much color in my ancestry, My maternal grandma grew up in New York in Westchester County, and she's really the keeper of our family memories. She has a lot of stuff, and we are kind of now, I laugh and say that I am so lucky because I have kind of all these artifacts from my family, and we just adore them and we keep them. And I need a family museum at some point. So she's from up there. And then my maternal grandfather is from North Carolina, from Burlington. And then on my dad's side, they're 8 generations West Virginians. So, I mean, obviously
Hmm.
from before it was
So
West Virginia, it was Virginia.
So that's the Fifth Avenue Artist Society was your first
Right.
novel.
Yep.
And so that was very much a family history. So coming out of that and going on to your next one, that was not a family history then, because you had already expressed that in the first novel. I'm assuming the second one wasn't a family history. Did you find what was the difference in terms of? I mean, you would have to make up characters in this one whole
Right.
rather than writing about your ancestry. So, did that make it that much more difficult? Was there less joy involved in, no pun intended, uh, but less joy involved in writing the second and the third ones, or are you at a point now where the history just comes alive for you regardless?
Well, they're all really personal. And the interesting thing about Secret Sisters is I didn't think I was writing about my family history. I went in, I had the idea because a critique partner of mine, a fellow writer who I share work with, she emailed me one day and she said, "Hey, I had a dream about you in a sorority. I don't know what that means or if that's an idea for you, but I just wanted to pass it along." And I said, "Well, I was in a sorority in college. Actually was their historian, but I'm not going to write something like that. I don't write contemporary fiction." And she said, "Yeah, Joy, but they started, in the 1800s." And I thought to myself, well, she's right. And that's very interesting. And I started doing research a little bit just preliminarily and finding that these women were pioneers of their fields, really of anything, because back then only 2% of women went to college for a variety of reasons. One being it was expensive, and the second being there was a medical truth of the day that stated that if women thought too hard, that their ovaries would dry up and they wouldn't be able to have children because all the blood would rush to their brain to, help them with their thinking. So, um, and so if you
Bizarre.
dared to like go to college, then I guess you were kind of saying to everybody, well, I don't care about a family, I'm going to risk that. So it was a weird time to be in college, but some women dared to do it. And the people that ended up kind of pioneering, the way for us in college were also the ones that ended up pioneering the way for women in all kinds of industry, because they were the ones that kind of banded together in college and had made these sororities really as a necessity to persevere together through this very much male-dominated society at the time, and to get their degrees. And I will say, so I finished the book, and I was in copy edits, I think. And I got an email. I have a friend on Ancestry who was working on a great family mystery for me, and we couldn't figure it out. And I'm not going to say much about it because it's in Fifth Avenue. Um, and we couldn't figure it out. And he emails me one day and he says, "Hey, Joy, I think I've found so and so." I'm not going to tell you the name. And I said, "Oh my goodness," and he came up with all these documents came up, and along with them were two sorority composites, and they were I based my fictional college Witsit in Secret Sisters on Knox and Lombard in Illinois. And the sorority composites were from a late 19th century sorority picture from Knox College, which was very, very strange. I had no idea I had any connection to Knox College or the sororities there. So I thought to myself, well, I guess I am telling a family history story after all. And the
Wow.
same is really true of the Grand Design. With West Virginia being just so deep in my family's history, the Greenbrier is a very personal place for us. And so even though it's not explicitly about my family, it feels very personal similarly. So I tell everyone that there's a little of my ancestry in all the books I write. It just helps me stay really well connected and really tied to the story, and kind of raises the stakes for me so that I make sure I'm as diligent as I can about getting the facts right.
One of the interesting things about you is that you say that your love of storytelling is a result of your parents insisting that you read books and write stories instead of watching TV.
Right.
So, talk a little bit about that. I mean, your parents. Why did your parents? But most parents don't do that. Most parents will just figure the TV is a good babysitter. I guess it just occupies them, and I get a little breathing space here. What did your parents know about television that they rejected to some degree?
Well, I think, back in the 90s, I was born in 85. So back in the 90s when I was kind of growing up, the TV was like smartphones today. You didn't want to spend too much time on them. There was a lot of, hesitation for people about, we have to make sure we monitor kids and how much time they spend on TV. And my parents just, everything from having us eat great quality food to just like, they helped us balance our lives and wanted to teach us how to balance our lives and be creative. And with TV, it was the same thing. They wanted us to be able to watch it on occasion, but just be able to have it not absorb all of our creativity. They wanted us to be bored sometimes. And that really did. It's the truth. If you're bored, then you start coming up with all these things. I think about the artists and all these artists and musicians and writers and really anyone inventors, really. They were all probably bored at some point and started thinking about ways to improve, the world or ways to entertain themselves. And there you have it. You have some great works coming in that really just have impacted the world as a whole. And so my parents, I think, really just subscribed to that notion. And we were allowed to watch 1 hour of TV per week. It was Nickelodeon's TGIF. And that was really exciting when we got to watch it. But
Well, that was really strict. 1 hour a week is pretty strict.
it was, yeah, it was. And, we laugh about that now and they laugh about that now, that, oh gosh, yeah, we had you watch the 1 hour a week but we were excited about it. Nowadays TV's kind of like, whatever,
Yeah, it's
no
so
big deal.
ubiquitous. And even today, and this is what I want to ask you about with your own children. You have 2 children. You're married with 2 children. So here you have 2 children. And not only is there TV to think about, you think about video games, you need to think about the internet, smartphones. And I don't know if they have smartphones yet or not, but
No.
there's many, many distractions. There's many, many things that compete with television that are basically passive viewing a lot of the time. Now, video games aren't passive viewing, but at the same time, it's somebody else's imagination that you're playing with rather than your own. So what are your rules around your children and how much time they're allowed with TV or videos or the internet?
Well, I'll preface that by saying that I had a flip phone on purpose about 1.5 years ago for about 1.5 years. The only reason I got my smartphone back was because we had COVID virtual school, and I had to upload the kids' work to basically a cloud, and I would have to use my husband's smartphone to do that. And so I thought, this is ridiculous. I'll get the smartphone again. But I voluntarily had this flip phone, and everyone thought I was nuts. But it helped me so much with my time management. I wasn't scrolling anymore when I was fully involved in whatever I was doing. And it was such a freeing thing. It felt so good. And I would, allot time to get on the internet and check social media and stuff. But it was very short compared to the time I would have normally spent on my phone inadvertently, And so with my kids, I try to limit as much as I can their consumption. I mean, I let them really watch, they watch probably about 30 minutes to an hour, I would say, during the summertime. And I let them do that to decompress. But really it's because, we're out and about. We're doing things.
You're talking about daily.
Daily, yeah. We're out and about, and I try to make their experiences and their wonder as far as it relates to nature and learning. I really try to foster that. And really TV and video games. We don't have iPads at all in our house. We don't do handheld devices for them. It's kind of scary to me. I mean, I read a review once. It said, or maybe it was an article that just said that Steve Jobs didn't allow his kids to have smartphones. And I thought to myself, yikes, if the founder's not going to let his kids have smartphones, then what is wrong with them? So, that just kind of was a light bulb for me. So they do watch TV. They do not have handheld devices. And I try to just make sure that they have enough time to be bored, to be honest. Making sure, because when they're bored, suddenly there's a new game to play that they've come up with, or one kid's setting up a shop and one kid's writing a book, or one kid's reading a book and one kid's running laps around the yard, and it's great to see how their imaginations kind of take flight when they're just bored.
Do you ever find that it's problematic in that they're bored and they decide, let's see what mommy's doing, and there's mommy trying to get her next novel written, and you need your writing time, and there's the kids. who want to engage with you. Talk about this. This leads into my next question, which is your writing routine. How do you, with two young children and a husband and a household, how do you work your writing into the daily grind?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I got my first book deal when my daughter was 6 months old. And I've always been pretty much a plotter, not a crazy amount. I'm not doing like hundreds of pages of plotting, but I just kind of do a bullet point list. I start at the beginning and I bullet point where I think the story is going to go. Um, so ever since I got my first book deal, my kids were, Olivia, my daughter, was 6 months old. And then my son came along 21 months later, and I had two kids under two for a while. And I would write at nap time. And what I would do is I'd put them both down and then run downstairs as fast as I could and write, look at my notebook, check where I was, and write for an hour and a half. And that was what I did for the first, years of my career. And then they went to preschool, so I had a little bit more time. I had about 3 hours during the day. And now they're both in elementary school, so I have a lot longer during the day. And it feels like I've got a long, long time. I mean, I don't write on the weekends. That's kind of family time for me and the kids and John, my husband. And, I don't really write at night. My mind's not very fresh then. And during the summer, it's just kind of a wash. I write when I can. During the summer, I do things like, for instance, I plotted my next book this summer. That was kind of doable. The kids had a few camps. And so in between, while they were at the camps, I was able to plot my next book.
How heavily do you plot them? Like, for instance, if you've got a chapter that's going to run, I don't know, 3,000 words. I mean, do you basically plot it to the point where you've got everything pretty much filled out, and you just need to turn it into narrative?
No, not to that extent at all. It's almost just like, well, I'm trying to think about how to put it to you in an easy way. I guess I'm writing about, your average Saturday, for instance. This is really boring, but I'd write something like, Joy wakes up, Joy goes to the store, just something like that. It's very, very simple. There's no dialogue. There's no narration. It's just basically what the character is doing and how they're moving from point A to point B. And that gives me some freedom to kind of mess with it a little bit, to see how I am when I'm writing. I don't like to get too far ahead of myself. And I do like to feel the emotions of the character when I'm in that moment. So I don't like to go too deep with it. It's just really a very rudimentary little thing I do to kind of help myself. Otherwise, if I didn't have a plot, I think I'd just sit there, I'd have time and I'd sit there and think, well, what comes next, and use up all of my time. So it's just it's a time management thing more than anything.
Yeah. So you've got a degree in journalism and public relations that you're at Marshall University. You mentioned that you went to Marshall, and you also have a master's in mass communication, I think it is, from University
Yes.
of South Carolina. So you're a Gamecock.
Yes.
And and then you used to be a marketing director at a wealth management company in Charlotte. Is that correct?
That's right.
Was it when you started having children, you decided you were going to be at home full time, and that's when you started doing the actual novelistic writing, or you had been? Well, actually, you had done three previous warm up novels, so to speak, because you said that your first one, your daughter was only 6 months old, so you must have been working and writing at the same time.
I was, yes. So it just, I've always been a big reader, as I mentioned, and as you grow up, I think you kind of forget what you used to like. So, when I was a little kid, I'd write plays and I'd write books and I'd try to sell magazines door to door about any number of topics. And as I grew older, I just knew, I'm not good at math. I like to write and I like to read. And that's about all I knew. So after I graduated high school, was approaching college, I thought to myself, well, what degree is it that requires no math? And let's see, I don't want to be a teacher. I'm not really great at that. So what could I do? And so I ended up attempting at first to do print journalism. And a wise professor of mine said to me, Joy, if you want to move every couple of years, remain in this, remain in this major. Otherwise, I would consider changing. And I thought, well, that's That's interesting. So I ended up changing to public relations, and I liked that. It was, something new every day, and it required writing. And all this time I was still reading a lot. And one summer I just read a lot more than, I would say probably double what I normally read in a summer. And just thought to myself, oh, I think, I've always liked to write. I kind of want to try to see if I could write a novel. And, the rest is history. You get that bug and you just keep going with it. So it's kind of how it started.
Was there a novel? Was there a novel that you read that was the one that really made you feel like I can do this? I'm gonna try my hand at it, because that's what happened to me. This is why I asked you the question. Was The World According to Garp by John Irving, and that was when I thought, um, I want to try writing a novel. I really enjoyed the novel and that The World According to Garp, and I thought. There was just something about the style of his writing and all that I thought I can do this, and that's when I really got interested in it. Was there a particular novel that triggered you like that, or was it just a cumulative thing?
That's really interesting. I think the novel that I'd reread before I started was Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, which I never will be able to write like her. But I think I don't know. I think I just thought this sounds fun, and you know how it is. You go in all innocent before before publishing really hits you,
Right,
and
right.
you
And you don't realize how hard it is until you start doing it. I mean, there's so many people who have think they have a book in them until they sit down to write, and they realize it's tremendously difficult to write, in especially fiction, because
right.
you're
So
not necessarily dealing with factual material. Nonfiction books, at least you do the research and you're writing about what you've learned. But people don't realize that there needs to be a very high level of commitment to break through that period of time when it's agonizing to just try to get something fluid and meaningful on the page.
absolutely. What's your writing process like? Are you
I'm
similar?
I get up early in the morning because I'm one of those people who figure it's too easy for things to get in the way, and I end up scratching it for one reason or another. So I like to do it first thing in the morning. Problem is, I'm not I'm not at my highest energy level first thing in the morning. And I'll tell you the other thing that I like to do, the other strategy I use is getting in a car and taking a drive and talking into or a recorder, or even taking a walk and talking to a recorder. I find that physical movement, even if you're in a car, you still have the visual stimulation of passing imagery. I find that really is stimulative for me. And sitting being sedentary, I think, is kind of antithetical to brain stimulation and optimizing your writing. At least that's the case for
Mhm.
me.
No, I totally agree. I think I ordinarily I can't sit still at all. Like I'm a type of person who I like to be busy. I like to be either walking or running or outside, doing something. And so, people always wonder how I manage to just sit there, to do it. And the truth is, I do. I get up a lot. I'll go walk the dog, or I'll go make a cup of coffee, or I find ways to get up and move around, because you're so right that movement really does help so much, or just changing scenery really will help you get unstuck when you're not sure where you're going next.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any particular strategy that you've developed? I mean, you've explained your writing process, but I'm just wondering if there is a particular writing strategy that you have found that you use now or have used over the years that you found to be really powerful, particularly if, maybe what I'm thinking in terms of is if sometimes a project can start to slow down. It can turn into a bit of
Mhm.
a slog. For instance, I remember Larry McMurtry was when he was writing Lonesome Dove, which a huge big book, won the Pulitzer Prize, but he was slowing to a crawl on that. He was running out of steam, and he just stopped writing it and wrote The Desert Rose, another novel, much shorter novel, in a matter of just, I think, a few months, and then went back to Lonesome Dove and turned out to be one of his, won the Pulitzer. So obviously was a big success. But do you ever find yourself in those sorts of situations? I'm kind of getting asking you this question in a roundabout way, but if there's any kind of powerful writing strategy you found over the years that worked particularly well for you.
One of the things that my agent always tells me, and it's always in the back of my head, is to raise the stakes. If the stakes are high enough for your character, then nothing really gets boring because you just keep trying to get in their way. And we were working on my next book recently, and well, actually, we were just plotting it out before I started writing it. And she was asking me, she's like, "Well, I know what's going to happen if the main character doesn't get what she wants. That's obvious. That's not going to be good for her. But what does it matter to the rest of the cast? Like, do they care? Does the town care? What is it? What's in it for them? Let's try to raise those and combine those with her wants and her stakes. And I think it'll make the book read. It'll make the plot, skip along a lot quicker and make it more interesting." And she's totally right. And so every time now I plot a book out, those are the questions I ask myself because it makes it fun for me as a writer. And then, you can always find ways to get in your character's way. And that's fun.
Hmm. That's
So
interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting approach. What is your current writing project? I mean, usually authors will not talk a lot about it, but what can you tell us about your current project?
sure. So I actually, as you may know, I mean, publishing's nuts. So I have, let's see, we got The Grand Design came out in May, and then I have another book coming out May 16th called All the Pretty Places. It's another story based on my family history. It's about my great-great-grandma who lived in Rye, New York, and her dad and her family, and she ended up taking it over, but they owned the largest plant nursery in the Northeast during the Gilded Age, and they sourced to people like Olmsted and Vox. And the story is really about who owns beauty and who has the right to natural beauty. And because during the Gilded Age, they would do a lot of plantings for these big industrialists at their summer houses. And she notices during the Panic of 1893 that people are kind of gathering outside of these big, gates of these mansions, kind of looking in. And the reason is really because people want some hope. They're looking for evidence that their lives can turn around and that, the being laid off from their jobs and everything that went on during that time period, that it's not the end for them. And she starts to really wonder about access to natural beauty for the average person, and really does find that even though Central Park was around back then for people in New York City, it was built as the People's Park, but it wasn't the People's Park. It wasn't anywhere close to the factories and the tenements and people that really needed access to hope and to beauty. Instead, it was really a playground for the elite, and they already had private gardens. And so this is really a story about, she wanted to take over the nurseries her whole life. That was something she wanted to do, even though, of course, women back then, her dad kind of dismissed her love for it and her intelligence with horticulture. But that was really her main goal in life. And then she starts to see that maybe achieving that goal could mean something more than just her own fulfillment, that maybe if she obtained something like that, she could really make a difference for others. And so
Now, is this a novel?
It
A
is.
novel? It
Yep.
is. Okay.
So it's coming out
Interesting.
next year. Yeah, it's called, again, All the Pretty Places. And then I'm working on a book. I'll have 2 other books out in the next 2 years as well, all with the same publisher, Harper Muse. And the book coming out in 2024 will be about the Grove Park Inn in Asheville.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah,
that's what I was
Asheville, North
plotting this
Carolina.
year. Yep.
Listeners, if you haven't been to Asheville, North Carolina, it's a beautiful place. It's a great place. It's in the mountains, and the Biltmore Mansion is nearby. A great tour there if you get an opportunity. So, have you considered writing, just based on some of the stuff you're saying? Have you thought about writing a memoir?
I haven't. Part of it's because, that's a good point. I don't know. I've just never thought about doing it. That would be interesting, though. I think I end up, I don't know, people may actually be too familiar with the stories I would tell, um, because I feel like ultimately all the ancestry I love and really parts of my life end up in my novels. Um, Now I kind of look for that, actually. I start to snoop around in ancestry, and I'm looking for ideas, thinking like, whose story is next, Um, but it really, I don't know. I've never thought about doing that before, but it would be fun to explore sometime.
Yeah, we're going to have a memoirist on the program coming up in, I guess it's 4 or 6 weeks, and she's written 4 memoirs. She's well known as a memoirist, and so that's kind of in the forefront of my mind right now. And memoirs are just so well read. They're very popular these days, and one of the things I've seen people doing is what they're essentially doing is writing a memoir, but they're calling it a novel, and it works
Oh,
very well that way. It's kind of a obvious that it's really a memoir more than it is fiction, but nonetheless, it reads. They tend to read very well. People are interested in other people's lives and so on. Um, and it's
yeah,
also
I
develops a kind of a strong. You really have that voice that takes you from beginning to end, rather than the bouncing between characters. And I think that kind of strong narrative voice and that singular voice seems to be what has a lot of appeal out there these days. Just based on what's selling and my own observations and what I've heard from book reviewers and so on.
That's really interesting. I'll have to explore that for sure. I know I've been loving some memoirs recently. Wade Rouse, one of my favorite writers, he sometimes writes under the pen name Viola Shipman, who was his great grandmother, I believe. But he just came out with a memoir called Magic Season, and I loved it so much. It was just talking about his relationship with his father and how their really only commonality, the only thing they loved together was baseball. And so it actually outlines the last baseball game they watched together, inning by inning, while he kind of goes through his life with his dad. And it's just such a powerful piece. I've loved that. And then Judy Goldman is one of my favorite memoirists too. Just, you're right. When you come across a memoir that's just very well written, it's just such a powerful thing.
Yeah, it really is. Now, you mentioned Jane Austen. What other novelists would you say made a real impact on you, or are
Well,
favorites?
Well, outside of the classics sphere of things, I love Beatrice Williams. I always have loved her. She's very voicey in her work, and I've always loved that. It's very
What do you
compelling
mean
to
by
read.
that, Voicey? What do you mean by that?
It's just a good command of a person. She kind of drops you into these characters, and immediately you kind of know what's in their head, and you know who they are, and that's such an art. It's
Like
just,
you may enter right in the middle of a conversation. It may just be. I mean, does that? Am I kind of on the right track? I've
yeah.
read
They're just
novels where, yeah, it's almost like you've just walked in the room and there's two people there talking to each other full throttle.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And you immediately are dropped in, but it doesn't feel abrupt. It feels it feels measured, but wonderful. And you can't stop reading it. And so I love her work. Really love that a lot. And then there's so many just contemporaries of mine in the historical fiction sphere I that are kind of auto buys for me and that I adore. Elise Hooper writes really, really good historical fiction. I love Heather Webb. Anything she writes, I buy. And then
Hmm.
I have my friend Kimberly Brock just came out with a really well done Southern women's fiction, I guess should say, novel that I think is way better than Crawdads, in my opinion. So
Yeah, my
it's
wife
called
wasn't too impressed with Crawdads either. That she said it was fine, but she said, I don't understand why it's such a huge seller and it's been on the list for so long and being made into a movie and all that. But there's others who just they adore it. I mean, it's so subjective. It's very subjective.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like all of publishing's like that. I was trying to explain it to some friends of mine at a book club the other day, and we were chatting about the publishing industry. And I said, if all of us walked into a bookstore and even let's say we picked one genre like historical fiction, and I said to everyone, let's go pick our favorites. I guarantee we'd all come back with different flavors of that genre and different authors. Um, and
Exactly.
that makes the world go round, you know.
Yeah.
And thankfully that allows a bunch of us authors to be out there with our work because there's so many people who love different things.
So, Joy, final question. What's your best piece of advice to aspiring writers besides perseverance? Because you did mention that earlier, that you really need to stick with it. It's a long-term effort to be a published novelist, unless you're extraordinarily talented and lucky. So, what would you add to perseverance as a piece of advice for the person out there trying to get to where you're at right now?
I would say two things. I would say be true to yourself. I think for me, when I finally, just sank into what I really loved, which was history, everything kind of fell into place. I quit writing to trends. I quit, looking at the bestseller list and thinking to myself, how can I be more like, them? Instead of that, I decided to be more like me. And I think when you allow yourself as a writer to fully sink in to what makes you happy and the stories you want to tell, then that comes off to readers as very true. And I think that's what ultimately makes us successful, and what when agents or editors are reading our work really resonates, is because they can tell in that work that we are ourselves, and that we are the most unique we can be, and really we need that in literature.
Hmm.
And the second thing is to never stop asking why. I That is the catalyst for almost all of my novels. In my research, that's kind of what propels all of my work, is looking at a big bunch of research, seeing the holes and thinking why, and continually asking myself that question, because that makes a really good book.
Both great pieces of advice. And on the first one, I've had, I mean, not only is it true, more true to the reader, your voice is more true or pure, but it's a lot more fun to write about what you really care about or what you want to write about, rather than trying to write something that, gee, this is hot at the time, so I'm going to try to do what he did or she did. In fact, I've had a couple of guys on the show. Well, one was a woman. One was a guy who said they write for themselves. They don't even think in terms of an audience or an agent. They write for themselves and what they want to write, and it may succeed, it may not succeed. Even Philip Roth, the great Philip Roth, said,
Mhm.
I write what I write, and if people are interested enough to buy it and read it, then then so be it. And obviously, that formula worked for him because he was enormously successful. So, some great advice. Um, Joy, thank you very much for taking the time and coming on the program. And congratulations on your success. It sounds like you're on fire right now because you've got several projects uh, going right now. You're coming out with what, 3 books in a matter of a couple 3 years. So you're
Yeah, it's crazy and fun.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much for having me on.